Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our Brexit Bite. Brexit, food businesses, are you ready? My name is Carol Heavey from the Brexit team in the Food Safety Authority of Ireland. I will shortly hand you over to my colleague, Anne-Marie Boland, also from the Brexit team. Anne-Marie will provide you with useful information on food import and export requirements, as well as explaining the situation for food that is placed on the market before the end of the transition period, which, as we all know now, is only just over 2 weeks away. Today's event will last 40 minutes in total, 30 minutes of content and 10 minutes for questions. If you have any questions from the presentation, just put them in the question box on your screen, and we will get to as many as we can at the end of the presentation. This webinar session will be recorded and available on the FSAI website afterwards. There are handouts available to download in the handout section on the webinar screen. The handouts available are Anne-Marie's presentation, as well as 2 documents that Anne-Marie will be referring to. One is an information note on storage, and also the recently updated FSAI question and answer document. If you're on social media, do let us know you're here using the hashtag FSAI events. Now I'll pass you over to Anne-Marie. Thank you, Anne-Marie.
Hi, good morning. Thanks very much, Carol. And once again, good morning and welcome to the webinar. We really appreciate you taking time out of your busy day to tune in to us this morning. So I'm not going to delay and I'll get started right away. I'm going to turn off my webcam while I present, and I'll turn it back on again at the end, which will be in about 25 minutes time. And at that stage, we'll be doing the questions and answer section. So I'm going to turn it off and then move on to the presentation for today. So in today's webinar, just trying to get my slides to move on there. It's a bit slow like ourselves on a very early morning. So in today's webinar, I'm going to cover a few areas. I'm going to cover a few areas of food law which we received a large number of questions over the past few weeks. So I'm going to look briefly at food import requirements and then touch on exporting to Great Britain. And finally, I'll provide some information on the requirements for food that is placed on the market prior to the end of the transition period, which we probably all know, and as Carol said, is at this stage is very close. It's happening on the 11 p.m. on the 31st of December 2020. And we'll wrap up the webinar with some questions and answers. So I'm sure, like us too, you are watching. I'm sorry, I'm having difficulty here transferring my slides. No, sorry. So there we go. That hopefully this time now it'll work right for me. So I'm sure, like all of us here in the FSAI, you too are watching and waiting to see the outcome of the negotiations between the EU and the UK. However, whether it's a yes, there is an agreement on a future trading relationship, or no agreement is reached, the end of the transition period is going to bring substantial and lasting change. And so if you trade with the UK and haven't already taken action to prepare for the changes that are coming, you must, even at this late stage, do so now. It really isn't too late at the moment. So at the end of the transition period, the UK will be outside of the EU single market and customs union. And this will mean significant changes for businesses, particularly those moving food to, from, or through the UK, excluding Northern Ireland. And I'm going to touch on that very briefly. So firstly, in regard to Brexit and food law, the first thing to note is that EU food law has not changed. What has changed, however, is our trading relationship with the UK. The UK has left the EU, while we, along with 26 other countries, remain members of the EU. So for EU members, there are no import controls on food coming or going from one EU member state to another, as the food is considered as being on the EU market, and as such is allowed to circulate freely among member states. This is referred to as intra-community trade. Now, while the UK has left the EU, in the current transitional period that we're in, the UK continues to follow EU rules, and the EU continues to treat the UK as if it were a member state. So nothing has really changed for us. However, all of this is going to change very shortly. From 11 p.m. Irish time on the 31st of this month, the transition period will end, and the UK will be treated as a third country importing into the EU. A third country is a country which is not an EU member state. Now, as I said in the previous slide, while negotiations are still ongoing on a future relationship, it's important to be aware that irrespective of the outcome of those talks, foods moved from Great Britain to Ireland, or indeed from Great Britain to any other EU member state, will be treated as imports, and as such will be subject to food import controls at the point of first entry onto the EU market. Now, before I move on to those controls, I just want to touch briefly on the Ireland-Northern Ireland Protocol. The Protocol on Ireland and Northern Ireland will apply from the 1st of January 2021, whether or not there is a free trade agreement. Now, under the Protocol, Northern Ireland is legally part of the UK customs territory, but subject to certain provisions of EU law, including food law. This means that food placed on the Northern Irish market must comply with EU food legislation, for example, as regards the food labelling requirements. Now, food traded from Northern Ireland to the Republic of Ireland is not considered an imported food, and this means that no new procedures will apply to foods moving between Ireland and Northern Ireland in either direction. Food, however, from Great Britain arriving into Northern Ireland is considered an import. Now, on the 8th of December, the joint chairs of the EU and UK Joint Committee announced that they had agreed in principle on all outstanding issues in regard to the implementation of the protocol, to ensure that the protocol is fully operational at the end of the transition period. And it includes practical arrangements regarding the import of food from Great Britain into Northern Ireland for the Northern Irish market only. The draft tests resulting from the agreement in principle are subject to the internal procedures in the EU and in the UK. Once this review is completed by both sides, a meeting of the EU-UK Joint Committee will be convened to formally adopt the text, and they will apply. This is going to take place before the end of the year. So now I'm going to move on to food import requirements, but I'm going to just carry out just a quick poll this morning and just ask you to participate. Emma is going to post up a quick question that we'd just like to get your views on this morning. So hopefully, I think you can all see the questions, but I can't see anything on my screen. So, but I can see that you're all voting quite rapidly for it. At the moment, now that I've just finished my Northern Irish Protocol update, I see that very few of you are particularly concerned about, i.e., Northern Ireland trade, which is great because there was confusion a number of months ago about the rules and regulations. So hopefully all those messages have got through. Looking at the rest of the poll, we have 75% of you have voted, so that's quite good. If anybody else is humming and hawing or are multitasking, you would just quickly skip on there to the poll and just give us your vote just to see. I'm going to close it shortly now in just a few more. I'll give you about 10 more seconds because it doesn't look like the percentage hasn't increased. So the good thing is I'm going to look at importing next, and 41% of you have concerns about importing, and I can quite understand that, as there's quite a lot of rules, regulations and documents about that. And then for those, and there's less of you more concerned about exporting, 23% are concerned about exporting. So it's good. I'm going to, as I said, cover and move along now to, we'll close the poll and I'll just move along now to the imports, and hopefully my slide will move. I think when we open these polls, sometimes it goes a bit short and decides not to work. So I'm just going to try opening it and removing it on that way. See if that works for me. So hopefully we're back on now. Let me just see. So moving on then, as I said, to import controls, and as I said, it does seem to be a concern of quite a good few of you. What I want to look at first of all is to just generally look at food controls. So EU food law requires that checks are carried out on food and food contact materials entering the EU to ensure that they meet the requirements of EU food law. And the controls that are carried out are dependent on the food type, and they can vary from a documentary check to an identity or a physical check. And some foods are considered to pose a higher risk to public health, animal health, or to the environment in terms of diseases, pests, or contaminants. And an additional requirements are in place for these foods to control those risks. So from an import point of view, EU food legislation splits foods into the following categories. So we have foods of animal origin, which are really foods such as meat, dairy, fish, honey, eggs, or foods that contain those ingredients. Foods of non-animal origin then are foods such as fruit, vegetables, nuts. A lot of alcoholic beverages are also foods of non-animal origin. Now, composite products are a very tricky area, and these are food products that contain both processed products of animal origin and products of plant origin. And a typical food would be a ham and spinach quiche, for example. And finally, one other area that are controlled from an import point of view are food contact materials. And these are often forgot about when people think about food. And food contact materials include any materials or articles that are intended to be brought into contact with food, such as, we'll say, a glass jug, or foods or materials that are already in contact with food, for example, a milk carton, or they can be reasonably expected to come into contact with food, such as maybe paper towels. So really, a lot of people can think of just maybe food packaging, but it is wider than that. So the types of controls carried out at import level depend on the type of product being imported. Now, foods of animal origin are considered high risk by the EU, as they can transmit serious human and animal diseases. And there are a number of controls in place, including the requirement for the operator responsible for the consignment to register as an importer with the Department of Agriculture, Food and the Marine. And this registration will also trigger a registration on Traces NT. And Traces NT is an EU online system for uploading certificates and other documentation required for import. Foods of animal origin must enter the EU through a listed border control point, and this is a specific point for a specific product. And pre-notification of the consignment's arrival into Ireland is also needed. In a previous Brexit webinar titled Brexit Bite, Importing Food of Animal Origin, our colleagues John and Noreen from the Department of Agriculture, Food and the Marine outlined the specific import requirements for foods of animal origin and also for composite products. And I suggest that you watch this webinar if you want to get further details on the requirements. And you can see the webinar on the FSAI YouTube channel, or you can access it from the FSAI webpage in the Brexit resources page. So moving on then to foods of non-animal origin, the majority of controls that are carried out on imported food of non-animal origin is on a risk assessment basis. However, certain foods of animal origin are considered high risk, and these are subject to an increased level of import controls at the point of entry into the EU. So the list of these products is available on the FSAI website, and the list is regularly updated by the EU. Requirements for foods of animal origin that are subject to these increased controls include notifying the environmental health officers at the port of entry. It also requires pre-notification of the consignment's arrival into Ireland, and in some cases, certain documents must be uploaded into Traces NT. Now, previously, these high-risk foods could have arrived in from their country of production into Great Britain first, and then be checked in there before entering the EU market. However, from the end of the transition period, their arrival from Great Britain to Ireland will now make Ireland their first point of entry into the EU, and they will be subject to import checks here. So as a food business bringing food of non-animal origin into Ireland, what I'd suggest is that you check the regulations to determine if increased controls and prior notification of importation is required for the foods that you are bringing in. Now, our colleague Deirdre from the Environmental Health Service of the HSE provided an overview of the requirements for these foods, for foods of importing foods of non-animal origin, and also the high-risk foods in the Brexit webinar titled Brexit Bite, What Food Businesses Need to Know, which again is available on the FSAI YouTube channel, or it can be accessed on the FSAI website in the Brexit resources page. Now, I know, and I can see from the number of the presenters that are concerned about importing rules and regulations, that the whole area is very overwhelming, and there is a lot of terminology and jargon used for the various documents. But I suppose a bit of good news is that we here in the FSAI have a free e-learning module available that goes through each type of product individually and outlines what you need to do for each one. And again, this module can be accessed on the FSAI website, Brexit Resources webpage, and you can dip in and out of the e-learning module. So now moving away from imports and just looking at some activities that food businesses may be involved in. Now, as part of your Brexit preparations, I'm sure that many of your businesses are considering maybe new activities to ensure compliance with EU legislation from the 1st of January 2021. So with many of you exploring options to prepare for the end of the transition period to mitigate the risks to your business, we just want to ensure that any such activities must ensure that no additional risks are being introduced in relation to food safety and integrity of the food, and that the activities that are carried out are in line with legal requirements. So I would ask that if one of the activities you are considering is increasing the stock that you are holding, that you consider the following. So if you ask yourself these questions: is the activity something that your business is already carrying out? Or if you are going to use a commercial company for the storage, distribution, or other services, is this activity part of the services already offered by this food business? If the answer is yes, what you need to check is that activity included as part of the food safety management system? If no, then what you need to consider is, does the activity require separate registration or approval? Or does it require an extension to the existing registration approval of either your business or the commercial company that you are using? New activities need to be assessed from a food safety viewpoint, and controls to manage any identified risk should be incorporated into your food safety management system. And I'd like to encourage any food business to consult with their inspector in relation to their Brexit preparedness plans, and especially for any new activities that you may be engaging in. We'll be publishing an information note with more detail in this area later on today, but we have included it in the handout section that Carol mentioned earlier this morning. So if you just look up there, you will see it as the Brexit storage, distribution, label and traceability document. So that's the document that has further information on that. And I would urge you to take a read and take consideration of the points that we have raised in that document. So I'm going to move on now from imports and from storage and move towards exporting. So I'm going to briefly just look at this area, and just to say that in terms of exporting, the movement of goods to a destination outside the EU is referred to as an export. And from the 1st of January 2021, the UK will be able to set its own requirements for how it operates its border controls. The UK have published their border operating module, which is called the Border with the European Union, Importing and Exporting Goods. This is a guide to the requirements for food imported into Great Britain from the 1st of January 2021, and it's available on the UK government website gov.uk. The UK government are also introducing the requirements in 3 stages up to the 1st of July 2021. So there'll be a phased approach in regard to the requirements for certification and pre-notification. So you'll need to check out the requirements in that border operating model for your specific products to see what notification or what phase is applicable to your product. In addition, I'd also just like to mention that we're often asked by Irish food businesses how products should be labelled for the UK market. So in terms of the requirements for the UK market, I'll have to refer you to the UK government website, gov.uk/Brexit, and you will find further information on the requirements there for placing food on their market. So the UK government also have a guidance available there on the food and drink labelling changes, as well as the format of the health and identification marks, which will be applicable from the 1st of January. And as I said, that's available on their website, which is gov.uk. One other area that I just want to turn to and that we've got a lot of questions on is relating to placed on the market. And I just see I'll just go back. My presentation is frozen again. There we go. It's just really on a go slow. So the requirements in terms of placed, in terms of food which is placed on the market prior to the end of the transition period depends on whether it is a food of non-animal origin or a food of animal origin. So under the terms of the withdrawal agreement, food of non-animal origin that was lawfully placed on the EU or UK market before the end of the transition period may be made further available on the market of the EU or UK and circulate between these two markets until it reaches its end user. So this means that food of non-animal origin, which is labelled before the 1st of January 2021, which is either placed on the UK or the EU market, will not need to be relabelled. However, this is not the case for foods of animal origin, such as meat, milk, honey, or food that contains these products as an ingredient. For foods of animal origin, or food that has ingredients of animal origin in it, that arrives from Great Britain into Ireland from the 1st of January 2021 onwards are considered imports and must meet EU requirements for imported food. For example, in terms of food labelling, this would mean that if it is a food that must have an identification mark, the mark indicated on the label must be the new identification mark. And the food must also have an address of an EU established food business or of the EU importer. Now, if the food of animal origin is present in Ireland before the 1st of January 2021, then it is considered placed on the EU market and it can remain on the market without a need to change the labelling information. Now, I've been talking about foods that were placed on the market before the end of the transition period. I just wanted to finish off this section by saying that for food manufactured in Great Britain from the 1st of January 2021 for import into the EU must comply with EU food law, including the requirement for an EU address and the new identification mark. Now, as we near the end of my presentation, I just want to quickly highlight that if you haven't started to prepare or only are at the early steps, there are some things you might consider. And I just have set them out there in this slide. So the first thing, if you do not have an EORI number from revenue, please apply now, as you will not be able to import without it. It's a fairly simple, straightforward process to get one and is a quick process, and it is free. Now, as I mentioned previously in the presentation, different requirements exist for different food types. So you will need to identify the type of food you deal in so that you will know, first of all, if you need to use the EU Traces system. As well as that, this will enable you to familiarise yourself with the documents needed for your food and the notification period that is required for those documents. You will need, and it's very important, that you identify who is responsible for submitting the documents. And while I know it's not easy to do, if there is any way you can simplify your load, it will help speed up the controls in the port at the point of entry, and you can be back on the road sooner. Now, so as I said, if you haven't started, if you just like to consider taking some of those steps, you should be well on the way to being prepared. Now, I hope I've clarified some things for you in this webinar, but just to say, there are lots of resources available to help you get Brexit ready. The EU have issued a number of resources during 2021, which are of relevance to food businesses. And of course, we here in the FSAI would encourage you to come to the Brexit section of our website at fsai.ie/Brexit for links to all of our resources. There are 3 resources in particular that I would like to draw your attention to that I have highlighted or mentioned on this slide. Firstly, our free e-learning module that goes through the food import requirements. And as I said in the presentation earlier, you can look at it from each product. You can dip in and dip out and see and go in for your own particular products to discover what documents you need. Now, we've also then updated and republished our questions and answers, Brexit and food law in Ireland document, and that is one of the handouts attached today. And these are questions that food businesses have been asking us about how the end of the transition period will affect them. And it also contains answers to questions generated as part of our Brexit Bite webinar series. And it is a live document, and it will be edited and updated as and when new information becomes available. And we will also be adding some of the questions that are raised here today to that document. The third resource that I would just like to draw your attention to before I finish off is our Brexit Easing, which is published frequently and contains bite-sized information on Brexit and food law. And finally then, if you're interested in information in other areas, the Government of Ireland website has a vast amount of information and links to Brexit-related information. So on that note, I'm going to finish off with my presentation and turn my camera back on this morning and we can start the question and information section. So back to you, Carol.
Thank you very much, Anne-Marie, and hopefully everyone benefited hugely from all of the information that you have given this morning. And there are lots of questions in. So I'll start off with some in relation to, as usual, actually, we get questions about placing on the market, and there are a few questions here about product that's placed on the market, UK labeled product that's in storage, and whether or not that product will need to be relabeled come the 1st of January. And then also in relation to Northern Ireland, product that's in storage in Northern Ireland, whether or not that product labeling is okay after the transition period. So I think there's a few nuances, I suppose, with the first question, depending on where it is in storage. So I guess you're going to get into that, Anne-Marie, and then just on the Northern Ireland one, that would be great.
Okay, great. Yeah, in terms of placed on the market and where it is at the stage, there's 2 things, first of all, that you need to consider. If it's a food of non-animal origin or of animal origin. So if it's a food of non-animal origin and it's either in the Irish market or the UK market and it's labeled, so it's ready for the consumer and it's labeled in accordance with the current rules, then that product can remain on the market and be traded between the UK and Ireland. So say, for example, a product just has a UK address on it. So a UK only address is fine at the moment. So a product that is labeled with the UK address is acceptable on the market. If that product, as I said, is a food of non-animal origin, it can then move from the UK to Ireland after the 1st of January, and there's no need to relabel it. So that's fine for food of non-animal origin. Now, for food of animal origin, it's a completely different situation. For foods of animal origin that are placed on the Irish market and are labelled at the moment, we say with the current UK ID mark and only have a UK address, that is fine. If they're on the supermarket shelf and labelled for the consumer, that's perfectly fine. If they are in, as I said, we understand from queries that we've received from businesses that some of them are bringing food in and putting it into cold storage. So if that food is brought in from the UK into Ireland, or indeed into another EU member state, and is labelled in accordance with the current rules, so it has a UK ID mark on it and it has a UK address, that can remain on the market and be traded between the EU member states without any need to relabel it. So they won't have to relabel their food. Now, then for food of for foods then that are labelled that are in Northern Ireland, and maybe the first thing to note is that for food labelling purposes, the Northern Ireland is assimilated to an EU member state. So it's considered from a food labelling point of view as an EU member state. So if the product is a food of animal origin, and it has a Northern Irish ID mark and a Northern Irish address, then it can remain on the EU market. So if that product is on the Northern Irish market with the current ID mark on the 31st of December, it can move on the 1st of January into the Republic of Ireland or into other EU member states without the need to relabel. It's considered the same as a member state, so that's perfectly no need to relabel. So I hope that will put some people's mind at ease. If it's a food of non-animal origin, it doesn't have to be relabeled. If a food of animal origin, it depends. If it's in Great Britain, traveling across and arrives on the 1st of January, it will need to change. And really, I suppose the thing what we need to consider is any food that is manufactured from the 1st of January must be in compliance with the rules.
That's perfect. Thank you so much for that, Anne-Marie, and a very comprehensive response. And as I say, there's a few questions there, so you have covered them. Now, if you don't mind answering a few on food packaging and food contact materials. So the first one is, for food contact materials manufactured in the UK and used in Ireland, will the declaration of compliance to EU regulations be considered sufficient after Brexit, or are there any additional requirements?
I might actually, because food contact materials, I think, is an area that Carol is very, very familiar with. So I might bounce it back to you there.
Yeah, I suppose what I'd say to the person is that there are requirements for food contact materials, I suppose, that you mightn't have been thinking about before. And the ones that you're buying are actually manufactured in the UK. So as the importer of those food contact materials into Ireland, you will now need to issue that declaration of compliance. So if you go on to our e-learning module, as Anne-Marie's outlined, or if you go on to the Brexit pages of the website, there's a link there to food contact material legislation, and we have all of the requirements there. And I suppose the HSE are the people who look after the importation of food contact materials. So it's always worth contacting them in advance of any import to make sure that there are no requirements that you need to comply with. So that's where I'd suggest for that. And I suppose maybe for Anne-Marie, because you do, I suppose, a lot with the regulatory end of things, people are talking about where there could be divergence in maybe the legislation in relation to food contact materials over time, and what do they need to worry about things like that?
I suppose because the UK has left the EU, they can set their own requirements for legislation. So we will be monitoring the differences just to make sure and alert people if there are different requirements. But the one thing to remember is that if you are placing a food on the EU market, what you need to do is you need to concern yourself about the requirements in EU legislation. So if you want to place any product on the EU market, you must comply with EU rules. And actually, just going back, Carol, to the food contact materials, one question that has come up a few occasions relates to the name and the address linked to the food contact materials. And I just want to highlight to people seem to think that because it's different, but it is actually, there are specific requirements in the food contact material legislation that specifies that, again, that the name and the address must be an EU name and address, or of the importer into the EU if you are bringing in food contact materials. So a UK address, again, we're going back to the same issue of placed on the market, but from any food contact materials that are manufactured from the 1st of January, or that are only going to be placed on the market from the 1st of January, they will have to have an EU address or an EU importer address. And again, the same conditions regarding address apply. A web address isn't sufficient. It has to be a physical geographical address based in the EU.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Anne-Marie. And as you say, that is a question we get asked quite a bit. And there's some questions here in relation to who needs to register as importers. So do you need to register as an importer with DAFM if your customs agent is acting as the operator responsible for the consignment? And again, if you have a customs agent in place who are registered with the Department of Agriculture, does the buyer need to register with the Department of Agriculture also? So I suppose in relation to those, the advice that the Department of Agriculture have been given us, I think, Anne-Marie, is that it's the operator responsible for the consignment that needs to be registered.
Yeah, that's my understanding as well, Carol, that it's that's what the department, or who the department want to hear from, the operator responsible for the consignment. Yeah.
And I suppose it goes back to your the final point you're making there, that you need to know who that person is and to have identified that person and to make sure they know exactly what they're doing, and if it is you, to make sure that you have all the necessary information to hand so that you're able to carry them out. Now there's a few questions here about food supplements and food supplements that have oil or fish oils in them. So in regard to, do they have to have a fishery cert or do they have to have a composite product cert?
Well, composite products is a hugely complex area, and it depends on the makeup of the particular food supplements. So what I'd suggest you do is we do have a small bit on food supplements in our e-learning module, and I'd suggest that the person looks at that. But also, because, as I said, composite products is a hugely complex area, DAFM have recently updated their website with information on composite products, and it includes a number of very useful decision trees, and that would help you to determine if your food is a composite product. So it would look at the food supplements, and depending on the particular constituents of the food supplement and the other ingredients that may be in the product, and then it determines whether or not it needs a health cert. So and we're also developing, actually talking about composite products, a mini resource, I think is what we're calling it, on composite products, that will be available later on the week, which might help. But so it depends, from a food supplement point of view, it depends on the composition of the particular food supplement. Is this just completely, if it's completely a fish oil, then that's one thing. But if it's combined with other ingredients, then it's separate. So I'd suggest looking at the composite product section of the Department of Agriculture's website, which will probably assist there, and then they'll be able to help if there's any further questions on that particular product.
Thanks very much. And I suppose just to say that we're developing a little module, micro module on composite products that should be available this week as well. So I'm going to finish off now, Anne-Marie, because there's no more questions, but I suppose I've seen a few questions come in there about, then there's lots more questions. But there's a lot of questions, I suppose, asking about organic information and just some guidance on organics. So again, would you tell people to maybe contact the Department of Agriculture in relation to that, or what would you suggest, Anne-Marie?
Yes, I'd suggest contacting the Department of Agriculture. At the moment, my understanding is, at the moment, If you want to import organic food from the UK, either the UK has to be recognised as an equivalent country by the EU, or organic bodies have to be authorised to approve. I'll call it approved organic food within the UK. And my understanding is that there are, I think, 5 organic operators in the UK that have applied for that recognition by the EU, but it hasn't been formalised as yet, to my knowledge. So we're still waiting to see, will they, as I said, will either the UK be recognised by the EU, or if those organic bodies will be authorised to certify organic foods. So I would suggest watch our website. If anything changes, we'll update it. Or also, if you want to hear it, I suppose, from the horse's mouth, if you contact the organic section in the Department of Agriculture, or Brexit Call at Agriculture, they may be able to give you further details on organics.
That's brilliant. Thanks a million, Anne-Marie. You've answered loads of questions there. And even though there are more questions in the box there, you answered most of the themes that people were asking the questions about. So that's brilliant, Anne-Marie. So as I say, sorry we couldn't get to all of the questions this morning. So if we didn't cover your question, or if you thought of something during the webinar that you'd like some advice on, we have lots of information, as Anne-Marie said, on our website, lots of resources there, and the Q&A document may have the answer to your question. So definitely check out our website and see if there's anything there that can help you. So a big thank you to you all for joining us today, and for taking time out of your very busy days, and for participating in the webinar and in the poll, and sending in all those great questions. Just to say, I suppose that the FSAI holds a lot of interesting events, or events that you may be interested in throughout the year. So do please subscribe to our future events. And you can do this by just going on to the website fsai.ie/events and subscribe there. So before we finish though, can I ask that you just take a few moments to complete the event survey? It'll pop up after we close the webinar, and it'll also be linked to the email that you get up afterwards. And I suppose, again, to thank you for joining us today, for taking the time out to join us, and being that we're very close to Christmas, it'd be just to wish you a very happy Christmas from all of us here in the FSAI. Many thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.